This is an excerpt from the In-Depth Madness episode on James Ellroy's novel American Tabloid. For access to the whole thing, head on over to madmethodpod.com/subscribe, pick Substack or Patreon, and you'll get access to this whole thing, plus all the other Madness episodes and early access to just about everything I release on this channel. Thank you, and enjoy. Howard Rushmore was born in 1913 and raised dirt poor in the little town of Mexico, Missouri, where he stood out as a gangly 6'5" teenager who, by age 16, was already doing whatever journalism jobs he could. He was also tending toward communism, a drift initiated by his mother's love for FDR and, just his general conditions living in the Great Depression and, by all accounts, living at kind of the bottom rung of society. This move towards communism was finally cemented after he witnessed the well-known and horrific lynching of Raymond Gunn in Maryville, Missouri. After that, he joined the Young Communist League USA, with no technical understanding of Marx, by the way, and began organizing farmers in the Dakotas. Not long after, he found himself writing for the Daily Worker, which was, more or less, the newspaper of the American Communist Party. His work there would see him rise to become the paper's official film critic in 1939, holding the position for just a few months before being fired for his ambivalent review of Gone with the Wind. Though he didn't care much for the film, he admired Gone with the Wind's technical accomplishment and wasn't convinced that the film was particularly racist. So the Daily Worker canned him. And this began Rushmore's personal crusade against communism, however and wherever it might appear. Howard Rushmore's passion and his mediocre to halfway decent journalistic prowess led to involvement with the decidedly anti-communist Hearst papers and a role as a key witness in the House Un-American Activities Committee hearings, where he testified against Edward G. Robinson, Charlie Chaplin, Dalton Trumbo, and others. But his rabid anti-communism wasn't just for public figures. At one point, he wrote an expose in the New York Journal American on an elementary school teacher who he claimed was a secret communist organizer for longshoremen unions. After this report, she was fired by the NYC Public School District and shortly thereafter killed herself, a fact of which Rushmore was rather proud. The utter intensity of his anti-communism, paired with a personal desire for notoriety, led to sensationalist stories which, according to FBI reports, could not actually be trusted. Nonetheless, McCarthy hired him as a director of research for a 1953 HUAC-like investigation into Voice of America, which Rushmore sabotaged because he couldn't help but to write sensational articles about the committee's strategy. He was pretty quickly almost as much an enemy of the Hearst papers and McCarthyites as he was of the communists. But we're not done with him yet. Howard Rushmore's technical proficiency, and more importantly, his willingness to roll in the mud, found him a job via Walter Winchell at Confidential magazine, of which he became chief editor around late 1953 or early 1954, after which it would become arguably the biggest selling magazine in the country. All of this seems to have pretty much gone right to Howard Rushmore's head. His amphetamine usage increased, as did his intake of booze. He clashed with Robert Harrison, the owner of Confidential magazine, and others, and proposed wild, often baseless, and vindictive stories, like his planned expose of Eleanor Roosevelt, who he claimed was both a lesbian and was sleeping with her black chauffeur. I love this story in a way because it's kind of zany and like, who really wants to besmirch Eleanor Roosevelt of all people? I also think James Ellroy references it in an interview somewhere, but I couldn't find it when I went looking for it again. Anyway, Howard Rushmore also published numerous stories about men in Hollywood that he considered to be homosexuals. Some of them might actually have been, and others probably weren't. All this gets me thinking that, it's like people say that the person was political, but I do sometimes wonder if the political discourse that we see today, as it is on social media and elsewhere, I sometimes wonder if it isn't just like the outward manifestation of real personal issues, right? It's like, like you hear someone screaming out about, fill in the blank, whatever public figure. And it's like, if they didn't have that person to scream about, wouldn't they just be screaming about somebody else, right? Anyway, just to finish off this story about Howard Rushmore. In late 1955, he appeared on the Tom Duggan radio show on KBLA and claimed he was looking for a so-called communist operative involved in the assassination of Navy Secretary James Forrestal in 1949. Now, the official story was that Forrestal, after being ousted from the Truman administration and suffering a bout of ill health, had thrown himself from a 16th floor window. But Howard Rushmore wasn't convinced. After discussing this on the radio and asking for the public's help, Howard Rushmore disappeared from his Chicago hotel, sparking an FBI manhunt. Now, it would turn out that Rushmore was just chilling in Butte, Montana, but even then he claimed he was undercover hunting terrorists. It wasn't long after this that Howard Rushmore's tendency to alienate everyone around him got him fired from Confidential magazine in late 1955, but only after making a deal with Robert Harrison that the magazine would help Rushmore out on the many upcoming defamation and libel suits. See, there was a lot of legal trouble coming on the wave of insanity that Rushmore had promulgated, and as public opinion turned against McCarthyism.
Hollywood was more than ready to fight back. Liberace and Maureen O'Hara led the brigade.
It shocks me to realize the availability of this magazine and this type of literature on practically every newsstand in the United States.
All hell broke loose after the stories about Liberace and Maureen O'Hara, and then Attorney General Pat Brown, Jerry's father, who was running for governor, appointed one of his deputies to launch a grand jury investigation of Confidential.
On May 15, 1957, a Los Angeles grand jury indicted Confidential publisher Bob Harrison and 10 members of his staff on criminal libel charges. The prosecution also claimed that 3 entire issues of the magazine were lewd and obscene, though they contained no nudity or obscene language and included articles like The Truth About Social Security and Meet an Honest Senator. Confidential fought back by issuing subpoenas to every celebrity who had ever been featured in the magazine.
We started subpoenaing people. That sort of caused a mass exodus from Hollywood, since these people obviously didn't want to get involved.
The trial was a star-studded affair. Despite the furor that Confidential had set off, it was not easy to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the magazine was guilty of criminal libel.
Now keep in mind that Confidential had a procedure where they wouldn't print a story without having generally at least 2 sworn affidavits from their sources.
In 1957, the state of California sued Robert Harrison, founder of Confidential magazine, for publishing career-destroying allegations with very little evidence. This was a very big deal. Many celebrities fled the state of California to avoid being called to the stand. Robert Harrison himself, safe in New York, was beyond the prosecutor's reach, so instead it was Harrison's niece and husband, the duo running the Hollywood office, who bore the brunt. And the state's star witness? None other than Howard Rushmore, who considered himself a kind of hero for exposing Confidential, though he was one of the most significant people doing this work, right? I mean, this Howard Rushmore guy's a real jerk. Anyway, the whole case ended on a mistrial in October of 1957, but Confidential magazine was never the same. Robert Harrison lost effectively millions of dollars in today's money on his own defense. Confidential magazine was entirely retooled, publishing pedestrian pablum and columnizing consumer concerns. It would eventually close down in 1978. But there's more to the story, because I want to tell you about the ultimate fate of Howard Rushmore, and this guy is basically a James Ellroy character, right? Now, despite the fact that there was a mistrial for the larger case, Robert Harrison and Confidential magazine were facing a number of individual lawsuits from people like Errol Flynn and Liberace. But before the ink was even dry on those settlements, Howard Rushmore would be dead.